Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us today for our Delivering Actionable Data to Executives with Papaya webinar. My name is Scott Lerner, and I'm an Enterprise Customer Success Manager here at Looker, and I'll be your moderator and host for the presentation today. On this webinar, Tamar Gordon is a Senior Manager in Business Operations and Analytics at Papaya. We'll review everything that you need to know about delivering data to executives, including how to create executive dashboards and creating presentations that will engage your audience before, during, and after your presentation. Tamar will also share best practices for content creation, how much data to share, and how to share it. Now, before we kick things off, I have a few housekeeping items that I want to cover. First and foremost, we'll dedicate 15 minutes of Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so feel free to submit your questions throughout the presentation. To ask a question to our presenters, please type your questions in the Q&A box and press send. Next, we'll do our best to answer all of the questions during and at the end of our presentation, so please do feel free to submit as many as you feel necessary. This presentation is being recorded, so we'll send it out to you once the presentation is over so that you could share it around your organization. And last but not least, the windows that you see on your screen are totally customizable, so you can minimize them, maximize them, and don't worry if you do minimize them on accident, you can go to the bottom of the toolbar on your screen and bring it back up. Now, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Tamar to take over here.
Thanks, Scott. Hey everyone, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. And thank you so much for joining today. Like Scott mentioned, my name is Tamar and I lead business operations and analytics at Papaya Payments. And so Papaya is a Los Angeles-based fintech company that focuses on reducing financial stress via a mobile bill payment app. And so with our app, you take a picture of any paper bill, add your payment details, and we pay it electronically for you. No need to find usernames or passwords, call anyone, or mail any checks. And so I've been with Papaya for about 2 years now. I joined as the 10th employee with the charter of building a strong analytics foundation. One of our values as a company is being data-driven. And so I've spent my time at Papaya focusing on really bringing that to life. Prior to Papaya, I worked at an ed tech company leading their analytics team. And before that, I was a tech strategy consultant. And so most of my career has really been focused on presenting information to executives, whether as a consultant or in analytics. And for the past 4 years or so, I've used Looker as my primary tool to do that. And so Looker was actually the very first tool I implemented at Papaya, and it has really enabled our company to live our core value of making data-driven decisions. As data leaders, we put a lot of work into making sure that our data is clean, accurate, actionable, but we have to have executive buy-in that our data is really accurate, is really clean, and can lead to actionable decisions in order to truly implement a data-driven culture. For executive buy-in, we need them to want to use the data and to trust our data. And how we do that is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. And so the objective of today's webinar is to learn together how to best share data presentations with executives to empower them to make better and faster decisions using data. We'll talk about the preparation component of the presentation. And so how do you even decide how you're going to answer an executive question? We'll talk about putting together the presentation, and then we'll talk about following up on it, making sure that all your work wasn't just in vain and that it's actually actionable. And so let's start by talking about the preparation. As data leaders, I like to say that we're also part-time translators. And so it is our job to take the questions that we are being asked and translate them into what our users actually want to see. And so the first step to sharing data with executives is always to figure out what question are you being asked and what follow-ups will it inspire. Our executives or the rest of our business users are often removed from the daily nuances of our data. And so it is our responsibility to help answer the questions that they truly want to know. Additionally, as we work closely with our executives and with our business users, with any stakeholder, it's a key skill that we should be developing to know what follow-up questions will be asked. And so, for example, if our CEO asks, why did our sales increase last month? She definitely wants to know why did sales increase last month, but she also wants to know, can we replicate what we did last month to create more growth? Is there a salesperson that followed a different process that worked better than the processes other salespeople are following? Is there an industry that we should be exploring because it's going to lead to increased sales and increased value? Learning what the executives actually want to answer can help you present something that's actually helpful for them and preemptively answer all of their follow-up questions. The second task that you need to do is identify your medium. Will you be using a presentation, a dashboard, or both? And so I've included here some questions that I like to ask myself when trying to figure out how I'm going to present the data. Now, I know that this seems like a very over-the-top list of questions for maybe just answering a simple question from an executive. But as you practice these, this will become much easier and more straightforward to you. Especially right now, with so many of us working from home, how we present information is absolutely so critical to making sure that your executives and the rest of your stakeholders actually get from the data what you want them to get. You have to ask yourself, is this going to be presented where you get to, via Zoom or one day in person, discuss everything in real time? Or are you sending something via Slack or email? Is this a one-time analysis or something that will want to be repeated? A lot of times, especially in times that we have a lot going on, we want to do whatever is the fastest, whatever is easiest for us. And so we think, okay, we'll do it as a quick SQL query, or maybe we'll do a quick Excel spreadsheet. When if this is something that will need to be repeated, it probably makes sense to do it in Looker, to do it as a dashboard. Ask yourself if your charts and graphs are going to be speaking for themselves, or if you'll need to talk through them, if you'll need to add details. What follow-ups are you anticipating? And the final one, which everyone always talks about when putting together presentations, is who is your audience and what medium do they prefer? It could be that this makes the most sense to do as a dashboard in Looker, but it could be that you're working with a brand new executive that doesn't have time to ramp up on Looker. Or it could be that it makes the most sense for a presentation, but your executive wants to see it in Looker in a spreadsheet as just a quick Slack answer. And so you might have gone through the work of figuring out what questions are you answering and what's the best medium, but then you have to confirm it with your executive as a final step. While you have identified the perfect end product, it may not be what your executive had in mind. Maybe she just wanted a quick answer or report before a meeting. Make sure that what you're planning on doing fits within the time, the scope, and method of delivery that your executives are expecting. If you offer to put together this incredible dashboard that's going to be really dynamic and change with different variables throughout the month, that could be great, and I'm sure that your executives will want it if you can deliver it within the next hour. And so make sure that whatever you've promised fits within the time, the scope, and the method of delivery that your executive is expecting. And so now you've figured out, okay, this is what I'm going to be putting together, whether it's a dashboard, a look, a report, a presentation, an Excel spreadsheet, a telegram, whatever it may be. And now it's time to actually create your presentation. And so to create a captivating and engaging presentation, regardless of mode, we're going to talk about 4 guidelines. We're going to talk about how important it is to set an objective, the concept of storyboarding, how much data to include, and I'm going to introduce all of you to something that is called the duct tape theory that I found really, really helpful to keep in the back of my mind as I'm presenting information. While it may seem like overkill to start with an objective for every single presentation that you put together, this is so, so crucial and so, so important. Regardless of whether you're presenting something in a PowerPoint like I am here or in a dashboard, setting a clear objective removes any doubt as to what your audience can expect from a presentation, which is especially important for executives that are short on time and focus on high-level decisions. A presentation will include, an objective will include what your executives or what your stakeholder can expect from a presentation, what you expect from them, and also what a presentation is not going to be. It'll tell them what a dashboard will and won't show. So for example, if we have a key company metrics dashboard, the objective of this dashboard is to provide the executive team with an overview of key company metrics and related actions to be taken by department leaders. This tells your executive that this key company metrics dashboard is going to include just that, key company metrics. It is not going to include all 75 company metrics that your executives may want to track in various other dashboards. If we're talking about a presentation, The objective of this presentation is to present the proposed sales go-to-market structure for 2021 and get executive buy-in. By telling your executives upfront that you are expecting to get their buy-in by the end of the presentation, they know that as they're listening to you speaking, as they're looking through the material, you're expecting a decision from them at the end. They know that that means they have to prime themselves for questions. They have to prep to actually make a decision versus just consume information. And so the objective is your goal. It can be to inform, educate, persuade, inspire, maybe entertain, whatever it is. By telling your stakeholders upfront what they can expect, you guarantee yourself that you'll have a much more productive conversation and a much more productive presentation. Next, I want to talk about a concept called storyboarding. And so this is a concept that's often applied to presentation to create a logical thought structure and flow. And this is honestly one of my biggest and best kept secrets for strong presentations and dashboards, is storyboarding everything. And so the concept of storyboarding is looking at anything that you create as if it's a story. We talked about how as data leaders, we are part-time translators. We are also full-time storytellers. We have the most access to all of the data of our company, and we know how to best tell a story that will get our point across. Now, one spoiler alert for any story that you tell, all presentations and all stories actually have to start with a conclusion or the most important metric as the first item. And so you start with what is most important, you start with the conclusion, because that's what people are actually interested in, that's what they're listening for. And then you spend the rest of your time explaining how you got there or what other metrics lead to the most important metrics. And so let's talk about this in action a little bit, because this might be a concept that seems pretty difficult to apply to dashboards. And so, for example, an executive dashboard can start with the high-level metrics at the top and then moving down the user acquisition funnel as you move down the dashboard. A sales go-to-market presentation would begin with your recommendation and then review the interconnected pieces of data that led to that recommendation throughout the rest of your presentation. Storyboarding is something that you proactively do before putting together a presentation. It can be as simple as grabbing a piece of paper and mapping out all of the different components of what you're presenting. You could even use a Looker dashboard and create different text files for the different reports and where they'll go by the time that you're done with them. Doing this ahead of time also helps go back to one of the first points that we talked about, which is figuring out what follow-up questions will be asked. Right? If as you're going through your story, as you're going through your presentation, you realize that executives will have a lot more questions about a certain topic, a certain component, you can go ahead and add it right there and then. Storyboarding doesn't have to be very sophisticated, just whatever works best for you to make sure that any dashboard or presentation that you put together follows a logical structure. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how much data to include in presentations, dashboards, reports. This may seem a little bit counterintuitive. As data leaders, we want to bring data-driven decision-making to as many people as possible. That means we also have the burden of making choices about what to share and what not to share. When you're presenting to executives, make sure to tailor the volume and granularity of your data to match the interest and understanding of your executive teams. And so you have to find a way to balance showing the right amount of data without too much noise. When we put together really large analyses or really incredible dashboards, a lot of times we're really proud of all the work that went into it, right? We did a dozen different calculations to arrive at the best metric, or we went through 100 different iterations of a presentation to arrive at the best way to show the data. If we tried 10 different calculations to arrive at a baseline metric, only show the one that succeeded and celebrate with the rest of your team or anyone else within your company that you're really smart and you were able to get to that point. If you can look at a certain metric daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, choose the one that you think makes the absolute most sense and show that one. Something I learned pretty quickly when working with executives is that most executives aren't very shy. And so if they want to see something differently, if they want more information, they'll speak up. They'll ask to see it in a different way. They'll ask to see the underlying data, the underlying definitions. You, as a data leader, should put out there what you think is the best response, what you think is the best answer, and they'll tell you if they disagree. As you get to know your executives, as you get to know your stakeholders more and more, you'll be able to find that balance between showing too much and not showing enough. So while understanding how much data to show is really important, it's also really important to understand how to show your data. I'm not going to go into tons of details about visualizations because Looker has dozens of webinars, and I was joined last week with even more sessions about how to create the best visualizations. Creating strong visualizations doesn't have to mean creating very fancy visualizations. It just has to mean creating the best visualization for the data that you're working with. If you have an executive that you know loves to see period over period analysis, overlay that period over period analysis. If you have an executive that you know doesn't care about raw numbers and only cares about percentages, show things as the Looker stacked percentage graphs. Really basic visualizations can go a really, really long way. And so make sure that you spend some time thinking through what visualizations your audience will react to the best and create those for them. The final pillar I want to talk about is something called the duct tape theory. And so this is a concept that my father-in-law introduced to me when I started my career, and it's really stuck with me since. It's a more fancy way or complicated way to talk about the need to pay attention to details. And so we as humans, even us data-driven humans, are very irrational and illogical. And so even though we know certain things are true, we make decisions in ways that may not be the most logical way. And so what the duct tape theory talks about is that, let's say you get on a plane, which I know right now is crazy to imagine getting on a plane. So pre-COVID times, imagine you get on a plane, you look outside your window and you see a piece of duct tape taping down a small piece of the wing. Your mind immediately wonders whether the engine is broken. That piece of duct tape has nothing to do with the engine, in the same way that a coffee stain on your tray table has nothing to do with the fact that the plane has been sanitized. But if you see something small wrong, your mind immediately wonders whether everything else that's underlying it is incorrect as well. This applies to presentations in the way that you have to make sure that every single place you have any tiny detail, all your numbers add up. If you're using the same metric, that metric looks exactly the same in every single place. Alternatively, if things look really good, they inspire a lot of confidence, right? Again, humans, not logical. If we see something that looks really, really nice and really, really pretty, we assume that everything underneath it is also accurate. And so spend that extra time making sure that all the colors in your visualizations look right, all the slides in your presentation have the same font, the same size, and flow through, because that will inspire confidence. And so at the end, as a final step of review in any presentation report dashboard, I always recommend to go through and redo any calculation that you have manually. If you have a table that summarizes percent, make sure it adds up to 100%. If you refer to the same metric in multiple places, make sure that that metric is exactly the same in every single place. Again, as data leaders, we are so entrenched in our data that we understand all the tiny nuances. For example, at Papaya, we have a concept called submitted bills, and we have a concept called paid bills. I would never put something that just says count of bills, because that could be so many different things. And anytime we do a count of bills, we have to explain, is it submitted, is it paid, or is it one of the 17 other definitions that we have? If you're putting metrics on a dashboard that seem close enough but actually are different, utilize Looker functions to explain those. And so on dashboards, you can add descriptions. Even in explorers or reports, you can add descriptions. Be as overly communicative as possible about what all the different names and definitions mean, so people don't question your data and don't question everything that's underlying it. And so you have put together your presentation, you've delivered it, and now it's time to follow up. So I've mentioned before, I've used Looker for quite a few years to deliver data to executives, and there's a couple of key tools that I've used as follow-ups over the years. There are a lot of sessions about all of these, so I won't go into too much details, but I'd recommend to follow up on all of these. The first is alerts for variation in metrics. There was actually a joint session about this last week. Looker enables you to create alerts for different variations or for different thresholds in your key metrics. At Papaya, we have something called completion rate, And we have alerts when completion rate is too high and too low. That's a great alert for me as someone that's really entrenched in the data. But what's cool is that you could also use these alerts for higher level executive decisions. For example, if you have a finance leader that's really curious about when does actual exceed budget amounts, you could set an alert to email her when your actual sales for the month exceeded the budget, so you can all celebrate. Alternatively, you could set alert when really large deals have closed and a large payment has come. These are really good ways to get your executives to interact with the data and to know when things are happening without having to check all the time. Another tool that I find really cool is Looker boards, which are, I think, newer. Looker boards enable you to, in a visually appealing way, put together a lot of reports and dashboards in one place. And so our CEO has asked for a lot of different reports over the years, a lot of different looks, explores dashboards that answer the questions that she's most curious about at the time. In order for her to not have to save all sorts of reports, all sorts of dashboards, you could put them all on a Looker board. She can open the Looker board and see everything in one place. If you put together a really intense sales go-to-market analysis and you put together a presentation for that sales go-to-market analysis, you could put all of the work and analysis that went behind it into a Looker board. That way, while not everyone may have been interested in all the underlying details, those who were interested in the underlying details can go look and follow up. In the same way that we talked about alerts, you can also schedule dashboards. And so I know that at Papaya, we have quite a few executives that have scheduled their dashboards to arrive in their emails first thing in the morning. If you have worked really, really hard to create a dashboard and you want to make sure that it's being used, bring it to your audience. Send it directly to their email. They don't have to go very far, even outside of their bed with their phone, to just look at the dashboard, see how everything is progressing, and see if any action is needed by them. Even outside of executives, we use this at Papaya to inspire action by the rest of the company. And so we have a key company metrics dashboard that's scheduled to send once a week before our company meetings, giving our various business users time to look at the dashboard and see if they have any questions. The final tip that I want to talk about for follow-ups is maybe a little hacky or stalkery, depending on how you want to think about it, but it's usage monitoring. And so as admins in Looker, we have access to seeing how every single person within our org is using Looker. We have access to seeing which dashboards people are looking at, which explores people are looking at, and who is not looking at any dashboards or any explores. Let's say our head of operations has asked for a dashboard. You worked really, really hard on creating that dashboard, and then you check and you see she has looked at the dashboard once and never again. That's a great opportunity for a conversation with her to see if there's anything else that you should be adding to the dashboard, if there's any questions that she has, if there's anything else that she needs in order to make it useful for her. We talked about how executives aren't shy at all, but like most of us, executives have a lot of things going on. And so if they looked at the dashboard, it wasn't exactly what they want, it's probably in the back of their mind to reach out to you and ask questions eventually. By using the usage monitoring, you for yourself can see that this isn't what they want, and you can proactively reach out to them. This helps establish your analytics team or you yourself as someone that's always there to help, and helps your executives know that things can be updated, they can be changed. It's all a flowing process to help make sure that the data that they have in Looker is actionable for them and that they can actually continue using it. And so I know we went over these kind of fast. You can look at all of these later on. And I think some webinars will also be sent in the follow-up to this webinar. That's everything that I had for all of you today. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to go into some Q&A now. And so, Scott, I'll pass it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Tamar. That was fantastic. Learned a lot myself and a lot to bring back to my customers. Appreciate you doing that. We'll jump into questions now. I did want to reinforce that Q&A is still open. So if you do have any lingering questions or someone didn't already ask it as we go along, please feel free to press submit on the Q&A function. But let's jump into the first question that was asked. So you mentioned that you worked for an ad tech company prior to Papaya. It sounded like a very similar role. What was the difference between presenting to executives between the two companies in which you've worked at and done similar reporting?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I found that executives are as different as we as humans are, right? And so you have some executives that are really, really excited to have all of the numbers, and they want to see all of those 100 different calculations that you did in order to get to the final metrics. And then you have executives or leaders that could not care less about the actual numbers. They just want to know what the takeaway is. And so they want to know sales grew because we closed a large account. Versus you have executives that want to know sales grew by 79% because we closed a large account that's worth $1 billion in XYZ industry by this salesperson. And we could replicate it by doing 700 different things. And so the appetite for data is really, really different amongst executives. And as you work with your executives more and more closely, you'll learn exactly how to present best to them as humans, not just as this overall executive bucket.
That's a great call. Executives are humans too. It's a piece of advice to leave with. All right, let's move on to our next question. What recommendations do you have for presenting bad results, bad news to executives?
Yeah, great question. And so we talked about how we as data leaders were translators and we're storytellers and we're also the messengers. And so we get to celebrate good news and we also have to be the messengers of bad news. And so a couple of things that I found really helpful. The first goes back to having to establish rapport and trust in your data to make sure that when you show bad results, people trust that these are the results and people trust that you are delivering accurate information rather than wanting to dig deep into the 100 different reasons why the results aren't actually bad, but the data is wrong. The second component is also something that we talked about earlier, which is making sure to preemptively answer any questions that arise. And so if I know that I'm going to deliver the results that a certain test didn't succeed, I need to have all of the information as to what happened, what are the next steps, do we have any ideas why? Even though it might not be specifically data related, being able to answer all those follow-up questions really helps executives understand, all right, what are our next steps? Where do we go from here? And so the two main things are making sure that you've established trust and rapport, and more than ever, preempting any follow-up questions when you deliver bad news.
Great, thank you. All right, let's see. Our next question is, do you have recommendations for gauging what level of detail to go into for executive briefing? So how nitty-gritty should you be getting with your executives?
Yeah, great question. So again, it's favorite consulting answer, it depends, but it very much depends on your executives, and as you know them, you'll figure it out. Of course, sometimes you have to present before you know the people really well. You have to present to a brand new executive. And so I find it really, really helpful to be on the over-prepared side. And so I would typically have one slide or a dashboard that shows metrics at a high level that answers the key questions and be prepared with all the underlying details. And so going back to my example of the question of why did sales grow, I might include one slide that says, these are the 3 reasons that sales grew. And if I get a follow-up question of, can we articulate or can we identify the percentage of each of these attributes, I would have that as an appendix slide ready to share as soon as it's being asked. And so it's a little bit of doing double the work. But again, if you're able to make that good impression, show that you're able to prepare, it instills trust in you and your information and in your organization.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any executive engagement, be over prepared and expect that next question. It'll help you out in the long run. All right. Our next question from the crowd. What are some ways, and this is a question I get frequently as a customer success manager, so I'm excited to hear your answer. What are some ways to engage your end user, execs and non-execs, to get them excited about data and to get them using your end product that you're creating?
Yeah, I love that question. It's definitely something that I've struggled with at different companies. And so the first thing that I found the most helpful is to make sure that you bring data and information to the users where they want to consume it. And so obviously, I love Looker. I use Looker a ton. That's maybe not the case for all your executives. And so if they're not ready for it, you don't have to push them to it yet. I don't know if I can say that on the Looker webinar, but eventually you'll push them to it.
You're cleared. You're allowed to say that.
Good, all right. So find ways to get any stakeholders the data in a place that's best for them to consume, whether that's in an email or a Slack. At my previous company, I worked with someone in the leadership team who had no interest in seeing Looker and claimed they didn't care about data. And so what I did was find ways to get them to care about data by inserting it into our Slack conversations. And so I set myself a calendar reminder for every 8 days to Slack them a different data fact. And so just in our conversation saying, hey, did you realize that our usage of this particular feature actually grew X% over the past 7 days? And here's why we think that happened. Or I'd ask questions to engage them in the data saying, we are seeing that users from California are using the product a lot more than they did before. Any ideas as to why that's happening? And so finding ways to engage them with really small metrics I found really, really helpful. Then at a company level, it's kind of a different beast. And what I've tried to do there, and I think has been successful, is getting people really excited about metrics by gamifying it almost. And so sending random questions in Slack like, who can guess, how many bills have been submitted this year? The closest person gets a Starbucks gift card. Or sending out different trivia facts just to make it fun and cool and exciting. And then inevitably people have follow-up questions. You can send them links to Looker. You can tell them, oh, you can learn more at this link. You could answer the question right next time immediately by looking at this place on Looker. And so finding ways to make it really fun and exciting for everyone to use data eventually gets people to actually want to use data in their daily decision-making.
That's great. Yeah. Competition and prizes always help drive engagement
regardless of level.
Yeah, generally anything too, but it works for driving BI usage. And also too, I love the point of finding people where they work. So using Slack or using different actions to get them engaged, because not everyone is going to be so used to going into a BI tool like Looker.
And
all right.
I actually have one more thing to add that made me remember it. I would really recommend to find I know Looker has some term for it, and maybe Scott, you know what it is, like a data champion in various departments and even in the executive team. And so Papaya were 60 people, and so I'm still able to know everyone, but you might be at a company with 10,000 people and you're only one person and you're only a team of however many. You can't know every single person. I would find someone in every single department that is really excited about data. And those people will exist in every single department. And I've been able to find that everywhere I went. And so find that person, get them really familiar with Looker, really familiar with data, and then they're able to get the rest of their team excited. They're able to show the rest of the team, look, I can do my job 10 times faster because there's this report that exists. At an executive team level, one of the executives can say, look, I can get all my questions answered this way because I work with the analytics team. And so you kind of have your promoters that you sprinkle throughout the company. And I found that really, really helpful to inspire a data-driven culture throughout the company.
Yeah, it's a great call out. People call them champions, people call them ambassadors, whatever it may be. It's always great. And it also, little insider tip, it helps you on the long run too, because then you have people throughout the company that can answer questions about Looker other than yourself.
We have a data request channel, and my favorite thing is when people that aren't in the analytics team answer other data requests. It makes me happier than anything else.
Yeah, that's a validating time when someone other than yourself can answer the questions. Great. Let's move on to the next question. Do you have any suggestions for explaining complex data to non-technical executives?
Yeah. So this is a very timely question because we just went through something similar at Papaya where we had a complex A/B test that we were running that the results seemed really simple, but were really complicated on the back end. And so what I found is that, and this is true for executives or really stakeholders across anywhere, they want to understand, they want to listen to what you have to say, but they also really they care about the bottom line, right? And so what I found really important is to try and simplify anything complex to absolutely the most basic explanation of it. And that can be really hard for when you're really, really into the nuances of the data. That could mean saying something that like really technically isn't right, but is close enough to being right. There isn't like a data overlord that is checking that everything you said was 100% right and you didn't make any statistical errors. As long as what you're explaining gets your executives to the right conclusion, you don't have to explain all of the nuances. Explain what the takeaway is, explain it in the way that's easiest to understand, and try to forget all of the details that no one besides you and your team needs to know about.
That's great advice. All right, we got another question. So this is from a customer that hosts trainings all the time for multiple hospitals. How do you create engaging training, or what's your approach to really training users within your organization?
Yeah. So we're actually in the process of planning retraining all of our users because we have grown so much in the past few months. And so for trainings, there are two things that I found really, really helpful. The first is to make them experiential. That's the word I was looking for. And so if you're leading a training and it's just you going through a bunch of slides, no one is going to remember everything after the fact. It's much better to have them engage with Looker or with whatever tool you're using in real time. Have them actually run the Explore in real time. Once you use Looker or any platform a ton, a lot of things that seem really common sense to you that you wouldn't even include in a training aren't common sense. And so by making a training experiential, by making users actually go through the process with you, that makes it a lot more likely that they'll actually use the tool after the fact. The other thing that I do, and this is possible for smaller trainings, I'm not sure of the scale of the trainings, is actually assign kind of follow-up, not homework, but follow-up work, or ways to continue to try using Looker, continue to try using the tool after the training, before they actually have to for their job. And so for Looker, for example, I'll train users on how to use Looker in general, how to use our main Explore, and then I'll send them a couple of sample queries and I'll say, try these out, and here are the answers. And then they can compare, this is what it actually looks like. But for the actual training, really making it experiential, I found it night and day in the results that you're able to get and how much people actually retain when they do it themselves. And the final point, I talked about this a little bit earlier, gamifying things as much as possible really, really helps. I know it feels kind of weird and silly to do games with grown adults, but people still appreciate it. People still enjoy it, especially now where everything we're consuming is on Zoom. Anything that you could do to make things a little more fun really helps a lot.
That's great advice. And I totally can resonate with getting your hands dirty when you're learning Looker or training about Looker. We do that ourselves when people come new to the Looker organization. We do the fruit basket example, in which I'm sure a lot of people on the call have seen before, but it really does help to get your hands dirty when you're learning a new product like Looker. All right, next question. How would you recommend sharing data with executives who prefer to not be data-driven?
Yeah. And so this is an interesting question because I've been told by different people in the past, I make decisions based on my gut feeling. I don't need data. I don't like data. And really what they mean is that they had an experience where data was inaccurate in the past, and so they've stopped trusting it. And so going back to what I talked about earlier, really important to meet executives, especially where they want to be met, and so where they want to consume information. And so it's fine if they don't want to make every single decision based on data. If they have years of experience and they trust their gut, that's great. That's what we hire executives for. And so I find ways to engage those executives with information that they might find interesting, that they might find helpful. And it's a cool exercise for myself as an analytics person because I get to just make up metrics or information kind of from nowhere. And so decide for myself what I think is interesting and what I think someone else would find interesting and continue to share that with them until something sticks. And so in the same way that I said, I've set a reminder for every 8 days, same with this, or set a reminder, send out, hey, I noticed this is happening, or hey, by the way, this is happening. Here's a screenshot of a report that I created that you might find interesting. Let me know if you want the link. And in my experience, eventually something will stick. It might be the 15th or the 20th try, but eventually something will stick, and then there will be a follow-up question, and then a follow-up conversation. And then you eventually get to show the power of data, the power of Looker, the power of really making data-driven decisions. And then once people realize how much can be done, then they're hooked, and then you're going to beg them to stop asking you questions.
That's great. I like you making it fun a little bit, where you can guess to what you think an executive might think is important, and you might guess right or you might guess wrong, and you'll be able to gauge that by their interest. Cool. We got another question with democratization. Sorry. How do you avoid explorers distributing reports that are conflicting across the data team? So democratization of data, how do you avoid basically confusion across what the data team is creating?
Yeah, great question. So this is something that I've had to do, and in both companies that worked in analytics, I started as being one of the only people, and then a lot more people joined. And so as talked about being in the nuances, there's a lot of things that oh, I have to add this filter somewhere, I have to change this filter in another place. And that makes it really, really not clear what needs to be done or what needs to be pulled. And so what I've found, what we're going through now, is that if it's possible to create confusing explorers, then we need to rethink how our explorer is structured, which is exactly what we're doing right now. And so if we have 10 different date fields and it's possible for someone within our data team to pick the wrong date field, that means we labeled something wrong, we built something wrong, and we need to really clean up our Explorer. And so we're going through this process right now where for our 3 main Explorers, we're completely redesigning them. And so the goal behind our Explorers is that someone with only a very basic understanding of our data could use them or look at the descriptions and make accurate reports without pulling in the wrong fields. And so what first component is making sure that as your data team grows and as more people use your Explorers, you really clean them up, add as many descriptions as possible, group items, add labels, add different view labels, use all of that Looker functionality to really make it foolproof. That's the first component. The second component, and this is one of those do as I say, not so much as I do, because we're definitely trying to move toward this. Really, really trying to move away from just sharing Explorer links and always saving them as views. And so even if it's something that's just being asked as a really quick data request, trying to save it as a view in the appropriate folder, because then you're able to go back to it. And then in our case, I'm able to review it and make sure that, yes, this is pulling the right fields, or no, this is pulling the wrong fields. And so the 2 main components are, kind of a longer term fix your Explorers, and a shorter term save everything that you can as views. And so it's very easy for whoever does have all the information to review them periodically and making sure that everything that you're sharing out there is accurate. I think that answered the question.
Yes, it did. I stumbled over reading for a second. But that totally makes sense. I think it resonates with a lot of growing organizations and growing interest in becoming explorers and answering your own questions. It's kind of a double-edged sword of you're getting interest, but you also want to maintain continuity with what the data team sees as accurate. Great. Well, that was our last question. Tamar, I can't thank you enough. That presentation and the Q&A was super, super insightful. I'm sure that everyone on the call feels the same way. Thank you to everyone who attended. As I mentioned before, this was recorded, so we'll send it out. Feel free to share within your organization. And yeah, Tamar, thank you again. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. I hope you have a great day, everyone.